Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is NURSYAKIRAH binti SHAMSUDIN from class AM1103B. Okay, so today our topic is about difference between the type of executive, which are difference between nominal and real executive, and other one is difference between single and plural. Okay, so firstly, the executive is one of the oldest branches of government, and in every political system, it holds great power and authority. Since people start to influence governance in society, the executive branch is seen to responsible or accountable to the legislature, with the head of government and cabinet taking constitutional responsibility for giving the head of state constitutional advice in exchange. And the concept of separation of powers, the executive is not allowed to make law and interpret them because it is the role of the legislature and judiciary, and the executive is expected to carry the law into action. Okay, function of executive is not only drafting the bill, but it's more than that, and normally jurisprudence is the responsibility of the legislature. But in every country, the executive has an important role to play in the legislative process, and the executive should prepare the bill for this purpose and should introduce them to the legislature. Okay, firstly, nominal executive is one who does not exercise real power in the governance and administration of the state. It has limited constitutional powers and must act in accordance with the provision of the Constitution. Okay, for example of a nominal executive is Yang di-Pertuan Agong or YDPA, Queen of United Kingdom, Head of State. Okay, so aspect of the difference between nominal and real executive are firstly, the role of nominal executive is merely held by ceremonial duties. In monarchy, the head of state is a living national emblem of the state, extending to the sovereignty as a symbol of unbroken stability of the state. Usually, we can see public portrait of the head of state in government department. The active role usually equate to a ceremonial role, such as in diplomatic relations. The head of state always the first one to welcome an important international guest from other country. Okay, second aspect is the power of nominal executive is defined and limited by the Constitution. Okay, head of state is one that not exert actual power in the government and administration of state because it has limited constitutional power and is exert to act in compliance with the constitutional requirement. Okay, for example, the head of state is acting on the advice of the government to carry out its duty pursuant to the Constitution and federal law in a certain situation. Okay, lastly, the aspect of difference is the position of nominal executive, which are the nominal executive is not posing, is posing no actual power. It means that the head of state is not involved any administration about the country because it is under the role of head of government. And the principle that the head of state should act on the recommendation of the government has always been practiced in Malaysia, at least at the federal level, in almost same way as in Britain. In addition, there are certain situations in which the head of state may use his or her own discretion to exercise his or her powers. Okay, next is about example of nominal executive, which are Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Yang di-Pertuan Agong is the king and the head of state of Malaysia, and it is the one of the example of nominal executive like I said before. Okay, under the Constitution, his declaration and position were established. As stated in the federal constitution, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong has a role in all three branches of the government, which are executive, legislative, and judicial. Okay, so His Majesty has the right in the executive branch to appoint a Prime Minister or to refuse the request of a Prime Minister to dissolve a parliament. His Majesty may do that, but as stipulated in the Constitution, there are matters where the Yang di-Pertua Agong has discretionary powers to rule on, and YDPA has discretionary power in such a manner as may be appropriate to safeguard the special position of Bumiputra as example. Okay, the Yang di-Pertua Agong is one of the several components of the parliament, and His Majesty was present only at official opening ceremonies of a parliament session. In comparison, His Majesty also has no right to vote in any legislative session. Although the Yang di-Pertua Agong and the accompanying fact are similarly a figurehead, the executive cabinet is often granted a range of more nebulous power over Parliament itself. They are the special emergency power which provided the right to act independently of Parliament as a government. That's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Najwa binti Adam. Now I want to present to you about the real executive. Real executive it describes the person who is constitutionally possess the real power, which is advising and made a command. As we know, the real executive is the elected leader of the majority party in legislative, who know as a prime minister. All the actions that can be implemented and described as a real executive can made only in a parliamentary system of government, and it is taken to mean only the executive heads like prime minister. For instance, the political executive who head the government departments can formulate the policies and supervise the implementations of the laws and policy of the government. This is because, as we know, that the power of real executive can implement the policy of state, and all the actions are performed by the real executive. Next, the characteristic of real power. Firstly, the head of government that is in charge of the affairs of the country. In this point, as we know that the prime minister is one of the closer lines between the people and the government as the head of government. In charge, the prime minister is the person who needs to care about the problems faced by the people. Second is they have a real powers to create and implement the law of states because they are legitimate being appointed, and they can possess the real power to a state by giving any command and advice. Thirdly, possess actual power, which is prime minister operate the fusions of powers, which mean that they have both executive powers and legislative powers. Lastly, as the head of a party politic, he has tremendous power over every members of his political party, as well as every decisions made as the leader of the party politic itself. It is very powerful and relevant to every member. So when he becomes the leader, he is very powerful to reach an agreement from its members. It's the roles of Prime Minister. Firstly, directing the work of the government, which is the Prime Minister heads of the government's plenary meetings, and we all know that the Prime Minister has the power to decide on the days and order for business to be discussed at the sessions. Secondly, as a head of a Prime Minister office, which means is to ensure that under all the situations, which is the functions of Prime Minister and the government flow smoothly. Thirdly, the government's political leadership, which is Prime Minister is the country's political leader, and he is responsible for reconciling the diverse opinions expressed by the various parties represented in the government on the government policy. Fourth is who propose and practice the law by implement the law in the government, which mean the initiative and programs in a coordinated to make sure that it will more organized, functional and acceptable manner to people.
Assalamualaikum, my name is AMANI BINTI SAMSOL BAHRI. I am going to explain about the single executive. A single executive is where the executive division and the law of delegation are assigned by one person. For example, the President of the United States. This single executive sometimes leads to problems, but it is also beneficial because the instructions are sent by one person only. The executive branch is by far the largest branch of the federal government. Then the power of the president. The former constitution responsibilities vested in the presidency C of the United States include serving as commander, the chief of the armed force, then negotiating treaties, appointing federal judges and cabinet officials, and also acting as the head of state. In fact, presidential powers have grown to include writing laws, conducting personal diplomacy, and heading the political party of the president. Other than that, president will monitor anything and make it easier to make any statements. One of the advantages is the concentrated direction of a single person that a president provides. This makes the presidential election very significant for the main possibility for citizens to determine who they want to run the country. The drawback of the president's personal agenda is people know what they vote for during the presidency. Because due to the differing views of each candidate, there are many gaps between the two parties. Another advantage of an executive body is a speed of problem solving when in an emergency. An example is that after the 11th September, George W. Bush was allowed to speed up by passing laws without having a conduct question and answers with his cabinet. This shows how convenient it is for one member to make flexible decisions. That is the disadvantage of a single executive, which is lack of scrutiny. With this lack of scrutiny, it has become the reason for the high number to reject of legislation which was put forward by the president. The bill does not hit an early stage under Congress crashes.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad YUSOF. I want to continue about my part is plural executive. Plural executive is the power of executive is divided among a number of people. Plural executive is also mean the power is not lies on the one person but many people. For more detail about this, the other elected officials are not able to respond to the executive, which protect the executive from issue of authority. There's so many states to the plural executive form. To understand more about this system, let's take a prominent example, that is Switzerland. Okay, the Switzerland, which is the executive authority of the confederation, shall be exercised by a commission of 7 members, known as the Federal Council, who are selected for every 4 years, and they will a member that become president of federation for 1 year. For instance, about this, the direct election of Federal Council by the people has been proposed several times, and there has been a referendum on the subject twice. Okay, beside that, the president is one of the 7 councillors and is elected for a term 1 year by the Federal Assembly. Okay, we proceed about next point is the function of federation. Firstly, function of federation is to ensure proper compliance with the constitution, the constitution law and decrees and further treaties. Next, to the major portion of the legislation to be enacted. And lastly, a member of Federal Council must reply either immediately or late session. This work function was a custom for the Assembly in an emergency period to grant the Federal Council the full power to issue any ordinance. It's considered fit for protection of the economic stability of Switzerland. Okay, next point, we proceed to advantage and disadvantage of plural executive. For advantage of plural executive, all the interests and opinions are given their due share of influence in the conduct of the public affairs. It means democracy. Besides that, one single majority party in the legislature or combination of 2 or more parties will agree to out a common political program. For this advantage for executive is firstly, it was wasted of time, means the governor could not appoint their official. It take time for them to collaborate. Okay, for next, if they have different political goals or different political understanding, those also make the governor have to carry out plans. Okay, that's all from me about plural executive. Assalamualaikum.
In conclusion, the distinction is relatively easy to see where the two roles are separated. The true functionaries are the political persons who make up the government and are headed by the Prime Minister. Thus, a clear difference between a nominal executive and a real executive. The United States and local government executive leadership plays a very significant role. The sources of a lot of creative leadership and regulatory innovation are governors, executive stars, and consists county commission and several other executives. Executive positions are either appointed or elected and are either hierarchical or collegial.